Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for this video. Today we're going to be talking about step number 4 in our overseeding process. That's going to be putting down the seed and fixing some of these bare spots in my yard. So stay tuned. Alright, so first off, before we start doing the actual work of putting the seed down, let's talk about the seed that I chose, and that is the perennial ryegrass mix from Seed Superstore. This is the same mix that I used last year in my yard. I had a little bit of it left over, so I decided that I would use the same thing. I had to buy just a small bag to cover the area that I want to cover, but I had enough left from last year that I thought I might as well use that up again and then get a little bit more to finish that off for my yard. So let's talk about why I love perennial ryegrass. And number one would probably be how quickly and how easily it grows in and establishes itself in your yard. If you've ever tried to grow Kentucky bluegrass, you'll know that it takes forever, or it feels like it takes forever, and it's a little bit more difficult for somebody like me who has no patience. So because of that, I like perennial ryegrass, but I also really like the look of it. These elite varieties that I have a very nice green color to them. They fill in, and perennial ryegrass is a bunch type of grass, so it kind of grows together in, not necessarily clumps, I wouldn't call them, but it bunches together, so it looks very, very thick and dense once you get it growing in there and establishing itself. So that's another good reason. It has a very nice look. It's very wear tolerant, and I just really enjoy growing perennial ryegrass because it's so easy. So let's talk about some of the cons though. And when I put down the perennial ryegrass last year from Seed Superstore, it was kind of a test to see whether or not it could survive our climate. Now I'm in central Iowa, and we get pretty extreme warm temperatures in the summer and pretty cold temperatures in the winter time. So perennial ryegrass, the reason that most people wouldn't necessarily use it in this area for a full lawn would just be because it can't necessarily survive all of those things. So last year was kind of a test for me to see what it would do through winter time, and when we came out of winter this year, actually it did very well. We didn't have much snowfall last year, so there wasn't much snow cover over it over the winter time. There were a couple days for sure where we were well below zero as far as temperatures without any snow cover over the grass. So that was when I thought maybe it would not hold on to that and it would not survive. But this spring it came back fairly well, and I didn't see too much die-off there. So then again, this summer was another test because I did not water my side yard very much where I overseeded and where I do have a lot of this ryegrass. I just let it go. And then in the fall here, when things started to come back, I really found that it was looking fairly good. And this is the time that I decided to kill off those fescue clumps that I had, so we'll take a little look at that here. And you can see that the green color was coming back, the thickness was coming back. So really survived that fairly well, and of course anytime you're going to have a drought or extreme heat, there's going to be some die-off down in there, and that's kind of what we got rid of with the dethatching process. So just keep that in mind if you are going to use perennial ryegrass. You have to look at your climate and figure out whether or not it's the best thing for you. Some people will overseed bluegrass, some people have tall fescue lawns, and of course I'm not even talking about the south or southern areas where you guys are doing some different things. So let's get to the process now of actually overseeding. And the first thing I'm going to do, which you may not have to do if you didn't have any bare areas or areas of your lawn that you killed like I did, is I'm going to try to seed these bare areas first. And the process that I do for that, I have a video that I did previously earlier in the spring where I fixed some areas in my backyard. I pretty much just take these areas and put down a little bit of new topsoil on there. You can dig up your existing soil if it's soft enough, but I was kind of at a dry part of the season here. So instead of spending a ton of time raking all those up, I'm going to put a little bit of topsoil in there so we have some good soil for the seed to go into. Then I'm going to put that seed down by hand, and you want it to cover fairly heavily, but not too heavily that there's piles of seed sitting there. And then we're going to either rake this in very lightly, or sometimes I just use my hands to kind of brush it up a little bit and just put it barely under the surface, because you don't want to go any farther than 1/4 of an inch. They say that usually around 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch will be good for growing your seed. So then after that, I'm going to just very lightly pat this in so that we get good seed to soil contact. The seed has to be in contact with the soil in order for it to grow. It can't just be laying on top of there without anything over it. Now sometimes this will still work and you'll get some light seed growing in, but if you really want to succeed in growing this, you want to cover it a little bit. And then we're going to use peat moss on top of that, just a very light layer. This will also help hold in the moisture and make sure that we don't get a bunch of seeds going away to birds and things like that. Now in the past I found that the peat moss actually is really essential to getting some really good growth to come in. Any areas that you seeded that maybe you don't get full coverage on, or it's kind of a super light layer of peat moss, normally they don't come in quite as well, and that's just because it holds in the moisture so much better. So this really is a step for the bare spots that I wouldn't skip if possible. It does add a little bit extra work and it is kind of dirty to work with, but it does give you some really good results in the end, so keep that in mind. So that's the process of fixing those bare spots if you had any like I had in my yard. But if you don't, we can just move on to the actual overseeding, which I'm going to be using my spreader. So we've completed the seeding on those bare spots. Now we're going to overseed into the existing yard just with a rotary spreader. This is a spreader that I use for all my fertilizer, all that stuff. You guys can pick one up pretty much anywhere at a home improvement store or online, something like that. So the thing about this is it's going to be a little bit difficult to find the exact setting that you want to use. Now when you pick out your seed, it's going to have a recommended rate normally if you're doing a brand new lawn, and then a recommended rate for overseeding. Now for perennial ryegrass that I'm using, mainly most people will say use around 8 pounds per thousand for a brand new lawn. And since I'm only overseeding, I don't want to go quite that heavy, somewhere around 4 to 5 pounds per thousand. So finding the exact setting on your spreader isn't going to necessarily be on the bag. So what you can do if you really want to do this completely the right way would be to measure out an area in your yard. Let's take my side yard for example, and let's just say it's 1,000 square feet. So then we're going to measure out 4 to 5 pounds. You can just use a regular scale that you might have in your house. We're going to measure out 4 to 5 pounds of the actual seed, and then we're going to put it into our spreader, and then we're just going to walk along at a low setting on that spreader and go in multiple directions until we have all that seed put out onto the 1,000 square foot. That would be the way to do it if you want to be completely accurate on how much you're putting down. From experience last year, I kind of know around the setting that I need to use on my spreader, so I'm going to be at a setting of right around 5 on my spreader. Then we're just going to walk the yard like we were fertilizing or doing anything else with the spreader, and we're just going to put the seed out as evenly as we can. Kind of take note as you go. If you find any really super thin areas, you can throw a little bit more seed in there by hand if you'd like, or just go over it a couple times with the spreader. Now also, if you do find any of those thin areas and you want to put in some extra seed, it wouldn't be a bad idea to cover those with a light layer of peat moss as well. Just kind of treat those as a bare spot in your yard. Now because I killed off a bunch of these tall fescue areas and I pretty much did the whole perimeter of my driveway and sidewalks, this was a lot of extra work to do. It took me almost 12 hours to complete this whole thing because I had so much topsoil to put down, I had so much seed to put down, all of it had to be covered with peat moss. So keep that in mind if you have as big of an area to complete as I did. You're going to need some time to complete it, and it's definitely going to be a lot of work. The reason that I killed off most of the areas by my sidewalk and driveway was because I had a lot of tall fescue mixed in there, but I've also been bothered ever since we've lived here by the fact that the sidewalks and the grass don't necessarily meet up exactly. So what happens then is that the mower kind of comes in, and then as I get to the sidewalks there's a drop off and then it kind of bumps into the cement. So I wanted to try to level all this stuff out while I had a chance here and while some other stuff needed to be renovated. So we'll see what happens. I got a lot of topsoil put in there now, everything leveled off, and we'll see what it does when all the seed grows in. After I completed this seeding, I wanted to get some starter fertilizer down on the yard before we start the watering process. And you can kind of use whatever starter you'd like. Some people have said a lot of good things about some Scott's brand that has a weed preventer in it that you can use at seeding. So you could look at something like that. I have a Site 1 available to me here, so I normally go with the Lesco products that I can get there. And I've had good luck with their starter fertilizer, so that's what I'm going to be using. So essentially we can put that down before we start watering, or you also have the option, if you would like to, of maybe putting something down like Milorganite now. It's not going to push too much growth on the existing grass. Or we could wait on our starter fertilizer a few days and we could put it down a little bit later so we don't get too much growth on the existing grass before the other new grass has a chance to grow in. Obviously the taller that we get with the existing grass, and the more it's going to shade out some of that new grass, and we need the sun to get down in there, we need the water to get down in there and get some warmth on that seed in order for it to germinate. So I know I've been doing a lot of talking about this process, but I wanted to give you all the experience that I have over the past couple years on doing the overseeding process, so hopefully you can have really great results like I've had the last couple years. If you have any questions on anything, please let me know in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.